And I think it's time to move on to the second part of our session. Right, Emily?
That is absolutely correct, Rita. So next up, we've got Sophia coming up once again to tell us about Ruby at HashiCorp and about how the Vagrant project is using it too. So welcome back, Sophia. Long time no see.
Hey.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing us a little bit more about how HashiCorp is using Ruby and about the Vagrant project.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, and if anyone has any questions, please post them in the chat, Discord. We'll make sure to ask them.
All right. So today can everyone see my screen now? I think so. So today I want to talk a little bit about Ruby and Vagrant at HashiCorp. So more specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about building Vagrant, so our build process, and how we use Vagrant to actually make that process easy. So I'm Sophia. I work at HashiCorp on Vagrant. I'm a software engineer. And I've been floating around open source for the last few years. I've been working in Python a bit, and more recently doing lots of Ruby here on Vagrant. So you might find me floating around on GitHub at Sophie1. You can come hit me up if you're around. So you might be familiar with other HashiCorp products if you're not super familiar with Vagrant. So we build stuff like Terraform and Packer and Vault and Nomad in Console and more recently Waypoint and Boundary. So these are all pretty famously Go applications, but we have lots of love for Ruby at HashiCorp as well. So Vagrant is actually a Ruby application, and we have some web offerings, so like Vagrant Cloud and Terraform Enterprise, which are written in Ruby. So today, I'm going to look a little bit at how we build Vagrant. So our roadmap is we're going to talk a little bit about Vagrant for people who are unfamiliar with it, some of the challenges that are associated with building this desktop application for using Ruby, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Vagrant concepts that we need in order to understand how our build system works. And then we're going to go ahead and actually build some installers. So Vagrant, it's a application that you run on your desktop, written in Ruby. And the goal here is to allow users to manage their virtual machines with ease. So say you are a developer, you're running on Mac or Linux or something, and you want to have a Windows machine for testing. Maybe you want to be able to share this machine with some of your coworkers, or you want to have some configuration associated with it. Then maybe Vagrant can help you out for managing this machine. Or say you want to have some build environments that you want to manage very easily with a CLI. Again, Vagrant can help you out there maybe. So now that we have kind of an understanding of what Vagrant is, let's go ahead and do some packaging. So we thought that this was maybe going to be a boring talk about packaging. Don't fret, this is going to be an exciting talk about packaging. So all of our packages, our packaging infrastructure is actually, our code is up on GitHub. You can check it out at HashiCorp/vagrant-installers. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about Ruby gems. So if you're unfamiliar with Ruby, the installable unit is called a gem. So if you come from the Python world, you might be more familiar with a pip package or a wheel. But once you have this gem, you can go ahead and install it somewhere. So this is amazing if you're running a web service, or you have a team of engineers that runs your infrastructure, and then you have like this gem artifact that you can plop on there and let things run as they will. That's a little bit of a simplification, of course, but when you're running a desktop application, then the responsibility of installing this gem is put on the user, and this can cause a little bit of problems. The first of which is which Ruby do you use and how do you install Ruby? So not all users will have Ruby installed or necessarily know what it is. So we don't want this to be a barrier for them to use Vagrant. On the other side of that, as a developer, we also want to be able to control the environment that Vagrant is running in, because if we're not able to do that, then we're susceptible to getting lots of bugs or issues about like Vagrant working in unexpected ways, because it was using the place that it's installed into is using like a strange version of Ruby, or maybe some like strange configuration that Vagrant really wasn't designed to be in. So the question is, how do I get a Ruby application that can be easily installable for the user, but also run consistently across many different types of machines and also maybe many different platforms? So the answer for Vagrant is to build an installer that has the Ruby runtime already embedded into it. So in order to do this, and on Vagrant, we actually run a CI that is powered by Vagrant. So we use Vagrant to build Vagrant, if that's not confusing enough, or if you haven't heard the word Vagrant enough in this past 5 minutes. Okay, first thing we need to do is take a look at a few Vagrant concepts for those who are unfamiliar with it. So the way that you configure your environment is using this Vagrant file. This is actually a Ruby file that you can use to define the things that you want your virtual machine to have. So the most important thing in this file is defining the box. So the box is basically like the type of virtual machine that you want. And then the other concepts that we need to go over is provisioner. So in your configuration, you can define a provisioner. And this is like a configuration of an action that can run against your virtual machine. So in this example here, we have a box that brings up, that is Ubuntu, and we have a provisioner, which is something we can run against this box, and it'll run like a shell script that says hello or hi. Okay, so now that we've gone over those things and we're kind of on the same page, we can go ahead and try to build Vagrant. So the first thing that we do in order to make that happen is we need to have a way to do reproducible builds. This isn't really a new concept, but we use Packer to generate some Vagrant boxes. If you're unfamiliar with Packer, it's a tool that allows you to generate machines, images. So we go ahead and we bring up some virtual machines, we install our build tools in them, and then we use a post processor to generate a Vagrant box. And then once we do that, we can start building out our Vagrant configuration for how we want to go about building these installers. So the first part of that is to define which box we want to use. So that'll be one of the boxes that we installed our build tools into. And the next part of that is to define a provisioner. So this is the action that's going to run against this virtual machine that's actually going to do the build step. So what does that build step look like? So it's broken up into a couple of different steps. The first step is building the substrate. So this is where we this is like a internal nomenclature for the stuff that needs to be installed for Vagrant to run. So this includes like the Ruby runtime, etc. The next piece that we need to build is the actual Vagrant. So this is the Vagrant gem that needs to be installed. And in addition to that, it'll go ahead and install that gem into the substrate. So we get all of Vagrant's dependencies. And the last bit of this process is to generate an installable package. So that's going to be a different step for each different platform that we're going to build installers for. But at the end, we'll come out with a similar looking package. So using Vagrant, we can go ahead and run this provisioning step against our box that has all of our build tools in it. And it'll go ahead and should pop out the same type of installer pretty much every time. So these are all of the platforms that we build for. If we have a more complicated Vagrant file than the one I showed before, we can see that we can build a bunch of different installers for each different platform that we need. And then if we take a look inside the package, we can see that we have this Vagrant executable along with this embedded directory that has the Ruby runtime and all the different dependencies that Vagrant needs in order to run. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to build a Vagrant package. If I can share my other screen, here we go. So, nice. So we have this Vagrant file that defines our build. We have this box that we want to use that has all of our build tools already installed on it. And then we have these provisioning steps that do the building of the substrate. So that's all of the dependencies that Vagrant needs to run, including the Ruby runtime. And then we have this packaging step that does the actual building of Vagrant and installing it as a gem. So I've gone ahead and run the substrate step already because it will take a pretty long time to run. It's just running a bunch of builds. But we can go ahead and run this packaging provisioning step. And so this step will, this step will do the last two bits of that packaging where we go ahead and generate the Ruby gem. And then we go ahead and install that Ruby gem. So we get all of Vagrant's dependencies. And then we go ahead and package everything up together. So in this case, we're running against Ubuntu. So we should expect to get a deb package out. So if we scroll up a little bit in our logs, we can see that we've built this Ruby gem that is Vagrant. And we can see in a second that it is going to go install that gem, and it's installing all of its dependencies. And then at the end of this, we output a little message saying that we've created our deb package, and we can take a look at it here. So now we could install this deb. So that was just a short little demo. All right. So we have lots of love for Ruby on the Vagrant team, even though it does present some challenges for distribution. We are able to overcome those by adding this layer of installation so that Vagrant is always running in this environment that we can control, and ultimately that allows the user to have a better experience, and us as developers to have a better experience answering issues. If you're on GitHub, you can come give us some love at HashiCorp Vagrant, and if you're interested in our installers and how they work, you can take a look at HashiCorp Vagrant-installers. Thanks, that's all I had for you today. I hope you learned a little bit about packaging Ruby as a desktop application, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, actually, we do have a couple of questions from the audience. There you go. So, how big is the Vagrant team at HashiCorp, actually?
We're pretty small. There's 2 of us that work primarily on Vagrant.
Mm-hmm. And what are outside contributions you're looking for?
So we have a guide up on GitHub of what kind of contributions we like, but also in our issues, we try to do a pretty good job of labeling everything up. So we have lots of stuff labeled good first issue. But also Vagrant has a lot of different providers that it uses. So we have, if you're like interested in like some operating systems for Vagrant to support or some provisioners for Vagrant to support, we usually tag up issues with those as well. So if you happen to be interested in those things, you can take a look at our issues and see if any of them are popping around.
Awesome. One thing our audience is wondering is like, what is the most sought after feature request that alas won't make it into upstream Vagrant?
I don't know. I feel like there's lots of feature requests that are requested, but maybe won't make it.
Maybe one that stands out to you in particular?
At least like how things stand now, we have some like requests about like remote execution and stuff, which I think would be super cool. But I don't think we're like really in the position to like take on that kind of work just yet.
Thank you. So does Vagrant have any community channels that folks can come in and participate in, like a forum or Slack, Discord, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we have this service called HashiCorp Discuss, which you can use to interact with the community. But also we're on GitHub, so if you have like issues or want to talk or something, we'll be there too.
Cool, thank you. So then our next question is, thank you very much for that link. Are there any features that you've shipped with a partner or customer?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there might be some, but again, I'm pretty new to this team. So, yeah.
Cool. So the HashiCorp user groups, or as I just learned that they're called hugs, I'm dying. I love this so much. Sorry. Did they make the move online? Have a lot of them been taking place online?
Yeah. I actually don't know the answer to the question. This question, when I did more DevOps work, I remember going to a bunch of them. But I thought they were mostly community organized. I'm not quite sure what the situation is there. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I think that's the last question I see. I don't think I'm missing any. So I will say, folks, thank you so much for these questions. Sophia, thank you so much for this enlightening talk, for being both on the panel and here. Like, we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.